One of you guys said, let's talk about the words having to do with windows. So a lot of people use, they don't know how to describe a window. Like, so raise your hand. I assume you know what a sash is. But a lot of people don't know what a sash is. They talk about, they call the window, they think the sash is the window. So I'm going to use this giant window I brought. I'm going to move it over here so everybody can see. So lower sash, upper sash, and then the box around the sashes we usually call the jamb. Some people call it the frame. Then you've got your sill. So this is called a stool right here, right? And then on the back side, where you've got this, angled sill angled out. You see them a lot of times where they're flat or they're sloped in, which is not good. It needs to have some runoff right here. Okay, if you've got a piece of trim under the stool, what is that called? For extra 10 points. Apron. Yeah, so your apron. Okay, so this piece of wood right here that comes off, and this one is called so look at this right here. I'm just sorry I'm quizzing you, but this piece of wood right here, if you took this off and this off, the lower sash would come out. It's called the inner stop. And then on the outside, and the outside is trimmed different ways, but this would be the outer stop. So when we're disassembling a window, and we'll talk about that when we go look at these windows, when we're doing window work, you always look at the windows and say, what is the best way? First of all, you decide what you need to do. Do you need to strip them down, restore them? You kind of assess what needs to be done. And then I think for every project, we're kind of looking at it as how can we get to the parts we need and do the least amount of damage. So you don't want to pull off trim if you don't have to. You can get to the weight chamber from the outside, from the inside. And you're probably familiar with this, but a lot of windows, especially pre-1920, they would have put an access door right here. Have you all seen that? Raise your hand if you've seen that in the jam. So you've got like a slot, and you don't always see it because it's painted 10 times. But there's going to be a little line here and a little line down here, and you'll probably see a flathead or a slotted screw. So we kind of look at it in terms of how can we do what we need to do without, the more wood you're going to pull off, the more damage you could potentially do. So there's a piece of wood between the two sashes right here that it actually will pull out. It's mortised into the jamb. You see that? So it's usually 1/2 inch by 1 inch or 1/2 by 3/4. And it's usually put in with a few finish nails. What is that piece of wood called? Sash divider. Close. Close enough. So officially it's called the parting bead. So it's a bead of wood that parts the two sashes. And if you look at the top, both sashes are cut so they wrap around the parting bead. So most of the windows are like this. When you get into the 1800s, you see a lot of different things, Just kind of like anything else. So these are obviously the pulleys. On the back side, you've got the window glazing. I left this one unglazed. You can see the points. So we'll talk about points in a minute. Okay, so that's the window, the anatomy. So when we refer to the sashes or the parting bead or the stop or the jamb or the sill, where do you see the most damage or issues with your windows? Sills? Sills and what? Yeah. Okay, parting bead. When these two sashes come together right here, what do you call this? So it's called the meeting rail. So you have a lot of issues here at the meeting rail with air infiltration and things like that. So whether it's a door or a window, just again to go into the jargon of it, these pieces along the side of the sash are called the stiles, S-T-I-L-E-S. So whether you're talking about doors or sashes or any of that, these are stiles, and these are called rails. So same up here. So when I say the bottom rail, the top rail, the meeting rails, that's usually how you refer to a sash. So if you were emailing somebody or you're writing up sort of a scope of work, those are kind of the best, or if you're writing up like a RFP and you want to put it out, if you write it in that way, it's going to make a lot more sense to woodworkers or window restoration people. So You might say we have significant wood rot in the sill, 80% needs to be replaced. Patching needs to be done at the bottom rail on the lower sash. You know, a lot of times what happens too, what do you see happening on the upper sash at the meeting rail? The joint slips. So you'll actually see you'll see a ½ inch of gap at the glass. So this joint right here, you can see the joint over 80 years with the weight of the glass pushing down on it, you know, and the glue fails. Glue is usually good for 50 years. So it just start to slip, and then you've got that gap up there, and then you've got major air infiltration. What we normally do is we just take the glass out, take the glazing out. If the joint is okay, we just reglue it, and everything fits back together like it should. Sometimes they pin it. Do you know what a pin is in a joint? So everything here is kind of an interlocked joint, but you can drill a little hole, put it like a nail or a dowel through that just to actually pin the joint together if the glue doesn't hold. So what do you guys think so far? Any questions? Is this helpful? So that's kind of basic, you know, the vocabulary of the window. I never told you what we do as a company. We've done a lot of courthouses. We worked on the Alamo and Lyndon Johnson's house and the Capitol. We've done a ton of houses. All the windows are the same. You know, I mean, some of them are 12 feet tall, you know, but really all these are built the same way. What we see most of all is these. You know, these are the same thing. They're just 6/6. This is 1/1. Do you understand that part? If it's divided light, a lot of times, you know, early 1900s, there'll be 2/2. So, and I want to teach you a word really quick too. You might know this already, but I hear this done wrong a lot. What is this called? Muntin. M-U-N-T-I-N. So a lot of people will call this a mullion, but I think technically it's called a muntin. Do you know what the profile is on this? Yeah. So with router bits, you know, you can use whatever bit, but most windows have an OG profile. So you see that, that's pretty common. Do you know what the difference is between a muntin and a mullion? Yeah. So if you had two windows kind of trimmed together, usually you'll have like a 6-inch piece of trim in between them, or maybe there's 3 windows together. The strip in between them is the mullion. And then when you divide glass or panes within a sash, it's called a muntin. So I hear that all the time. Okay. So what we typically do with windows is our process would be probably different than yours, because you may be dealing with, correct me if I'm wrong, if you have a house or a cabin or a series of, you're probably dealing with a couple windows at a time, 1 or 2 at a time. What we do is we go into a building or a house and we take them all out. We normally leave the jambs in place, but we'll pull all the sashes out. We like to do work in the shop on the table. It's a lot easier than, you know, on sawhorses in the grass. So if you have a place where you can take them to work, that's a lot better. So if you pull the windows out and you need to seal up the openings, what's the best way to do that? Leave them open? Plywood? Yeah. Yeah. Any thoughts about that? You see a lot of different things where you can use a compression frame so you can take them in and out. You can just do plywood and screw it to the trim or inside the jamb. If you leave the parting bead in or some of the stop, you can screw to that, or you can sort of go in and just hit the jamb. The problem is if you don't seal them well and you get a big storm come through, it blows it out and makes a mess. The thing about boarding up windows in a building, if you're working on it, is it makes it really extremely dark. So you don't realize it, but it's really, if you take, you know, 8 or 10 windows out and you go into a room, you can't, even if you have lights in there, it's just really dark. So we've started using what's called Coroplast. Are you familiar with that? This is like plastic sign material, but you can get a clear or pretty clear, and then we'll just use 1x material and just screw it to that and kind of make a frame. The great thing about Coroplast is it's not really any more expensive than plywood, but it lets light through. So it allows you to do other things, and it's pretty nice.
It's called what?
Coroplast, Coroplast. So we buy it, like there's plastic places that sell acrylic and different types of plexiglass, and we buy it there. But I've kind of moved to that just because it really does help a lot with light. So, okay, so if we have double hung windows, what other kind of windows do you have? A lot of casements? Are they all wood?
No, not all.
Raise your hand if you have steel casements. Okay. So for us, so we mainly do wood. We've done some steel work, but you're still dealing with a lot of times you're dealing with glazing issues. You're dealing with weather stripping and things like that. Do you ever see any other window types besides, so you know what a casement window is, right? It's hinged, usually like this, opens in or out. If the hinges are on top or on the bottom, what do you call it? This is just good, yeah. Awning casement. So have you seen windows that are hinged at the bottom and they have a chain at the top? And they just kind of lower out? It's all for cross ventilation. If it's 105 degrees in Texas, and there's no air conditioning, that's what they would have done. They would have slept on the porch, opened all the windows, hoped for a cool evening. So you have awning casements, you have casements that are hinged on the side. Have you ever seen a pivot window? Okay, you can't answer anymore. What's a pivot window?
Got a center pin on top and bottom and a little.
Yeah. And I've seen those too in certain buildings. I don't know if they'd be at the parks, but any other window types that you've seen? Those are the big ones. I think, sliders. Yeah. Do you have any sliders? They'd be kind of like this. They're just turned sideways and no counterbalancing. So I'll just show you real quick, just so you know, for information purposes, how we weather strip. There's a lot of different ways. But if you can see in here, dang it, if you can see in here, we put this metal on the side. Can you see it all right? You can see it later. It's called concealed interlocking weather stripping. So you can see where we slotted the bottom rail right here, right? Just basically a curve cut. And we do it on all three sides of the lower sash and the upper sash. And so it's literally sliding on this. This is zinc. You can do zinc or bronze. And it's sliding on a track, but it makes them open and close a lot easier. They don't rattle because they're sitting on a track. You know, one of the things you'll probably do if you're working on windows, if you take it apart, a mistake that's commonly made is you leave the stop too far away from the sash, and then what happens? So it rattles. So the stop you want to put, a 16th or so. So this would be set 16th or so close to the sash. If you get it too tight, they're not going to open. They're going to swell and stick. You don't want it too loose. They're going to rattle. And I don't know if you can see this that well, but at the meeting rail, these two sashes come together and they interlock. If you can see that, it's a J-hook and it's mortised into the meeting rail. And then the top, this lower sash, when it comes down, it has a flat piece. And so it goes like this and they just lock together. So this weather stripping dates back to the 1800s and it's been used a long time. We've mainly seen it only occasionally in houses and a lot in commercial buildings. But I don't think weather stripping was a huge priority to them 100 years ago. Sometimes we can't weather strip with metal, so we'll use, I have some up here. And then this is bulb weather stripping. It's made out of Santoprene, so it will last a long time. This is real nice. So if you're weather stripping this door right here, they have a router that we bought from them that will just sit in here with a fence with a 45-degree angle, and it'll just go right here between the jamb and the stop, and then you just stick it right in there and you don't see it. And depending on the gap that you have, it's really nice for just sealing up doors. I don't like the big metal frames that go all the way around with it push up. This doesn't look nice. And this is cheaper and easier and will last a long time. But we've used these on windows as well. sometimes you can't take them out. You can't get to, they're just for different reasons, it doesn't allow for metal weather stripping. So you can do a curve cut on like the bottom rail of the lower sash if you need to seal that up. And it is simple. So it's just a good way to weather strip. So you do want windows to lock, So if we cannot use the locks, a lot of times the strike is missing, this is busted off, the lock's just gone. So this is the one that we use a lot. It's just a cast iron lock. It's about $10. And it is on this, if you look at your information sheet, it's called House of Antique Hardware, which is a website. So this is just a cast iron lock that we use a lot. To me, it works well. It's not expensive and it looks historic. So, but we get that a lot from people. They want on our projects, they want to keep everything original that you possibly can. So it kind of depends on what you've got going on. So don't need to go into this too much. So this weight right here that has 3 slashes in it is how much does it weigh? 3 pounds, and this is a 4-pounder. So do you have a lot of weights in yours, or are they hung in different ways? Some. Do you have spring bolts? Are you familiar with spring bolts? So I'll pass these around too. You see these a lot in older windows. This is a cheap one, but have you seen these before? Okay, so these would sit, if you didn't have weights, so normally you'd have a weight chamber on either side of this of about 2 inches or so, and then it'd be trimmed, and then you have your ropes and your weights there. Sometimes, if they're really old windows, you'll have nothing at all. And so then you can either use spring balances or these. So this would sit in the sash somewhere right in here, and then when you open it, you'd pull it this way, and then you'd put a hole in the jamb. So you could set it, like a hole would be there and a hole would be here. And what you do to open the window then is you just pull both of them out, slide it up, and pop it into the hole. So I think these are just a couple dollars. So I'll pass this around. We've seen these a lot in 1800s houses. They're just probably a cheaper way to do it, or they just had nothing and they'd use a stick, So the other window hardware you'll see is a sash pull. So I don't know if you guys have these, but that's just another piece of hardware that you'll see. Okay, the other thing I brought to show you is what's called are you all familiar with these? Do you see these? Okay. Where do you see them? Yeah. They actually use them in windows today. They're just hidden behind little secret pockets. So this is called anybody know? $20 question.
What's it called?
Yeah.
A pain in the...
So it's officially called a spiral balance. And spiral balance is real handy. You can get so this is, I think this is I don't remember the diameter on this one, but there's this size and there's one that's a little bit skinnier. And you just order the length. So on this window here, if you wanted to use a spiral balance, it's a little too tall. It would attach, you see this hole right here, it would attach right here where the rope would go. And then there's a little bracket. And instead of, you have a pretty good round hole in the side of the sash and it would slide right down there. And then there's a bracket that attaches it to the bottom of the sash. And then you wind it before you actually screw it in. And it adds tension to it. So you added just enough to where when the window goes up, it just stays put, this way. And then when you close it, it kind of pushes it down. If you lift it up and there's nothing to counterbalance it, so if a sash weighs 12 pounds, what size weight would you need on either side? You need 2 6s. So then when you open it up, it just kind of cancels out gravity. So these are just designed to do the same thing, but you don't need a, chamber. You don't need pulleys, you don't need lead weights, you don't need rope. I like ropes a lot better because for the next 500 years, all you'd ever need is rope or sash cord. These we usually replace if we're working on a project and there's these in the windows. They started using these about 19. Yep. Yeah, in the 50s they started doing kind of what they do now. They change everything every year. So you see all kinds of cable, like little wire cables and little metal wraparound things and these. And they're harder to work on because, there's nothing standard, so. Probably most of yours, I would guess, are either rope weighted or they are not weighted. Is that correct? Or they're casements. It's called Samson sash cord, just like it sounds. It's not that expensive. You can run to Ace or Home Depot and buy sash cord / clothesline. I don't think it's as good. And you'll feel on this, it's just a better quality. And so we see all the time sash cord that's, close to 100 years old. And of course it's drying out and cracking, but I think the better sash cord you use, just like paint or anything else, the better. What do you do? So you're going to pick out a few of those windows in the reflectory and work on those. First of all, you want to do restoration, preservation, or stabilization before they get to that point. Because once they're literally falling out of the opening, there's going to be a lot more woodworking and fabrication involved. So what I was going to say today is windows are not that. If we were to take them apart, you'd see, and you probably a lot of you know, it's just parts, and they were meant to come apart. The stuff we have today that we sell, Anderson and Marvin, all these things, we can't even work on them because it's plastic and metal and wood kind of all integrated together and all these parts and rods going through it. Those are not meant to be worked on. When they fail, the glass or the wood, you throw the whole thing away, you buy a whole new one and put it in. That's our society. But these were meant to be worked on, so they really come apart. You take so if we're working on this window, we'll talk about this in a workshop, we would just want to disassemble it. We would just want to take the stop off, pull out the parting bead. We almost always replace the parting bead because it's usually painted, 50 times. You want a nice clean edge here. We'll take the sashes out and we'll strip them. We just take everything out. We'll usually leave the jamb and the sill in place and just do field work on that. But they were meant to come apart. So if anybody in here or anybody that you wanted to train, you said, yeah, that's how you take a window apart. You take it apart, you put the sashes on a table. We normally just remove the paint. You don't have to. You can scrape and sand, get them kind of cleaned up, paint them. The only thing that will throw a wrench into that is if you're not a woodworker, experienced making window parts, it doesn't help you to take it apart because you're not going to have the parts. So for working on windows, so let's say everybody in here has got some building with windows like you just described. That's something you're going to have to line up. Raise your hand if you have access to a woodworker or a shop or somebody in your area that can make parts. One? Really?
Actually is quite the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, so metalworking, woodworking, all that kind of stuff. A cabinet maker may be able to do it. Carpenters, it depends. I mean, there's a lot of different type of carpenters. Just because you're a carpenter doesn't mean you could, make a sash. Now, parting bead is pretty simple. But, so let's talk about, one of the things you said was the sill is rotten and fallen through. So that's something, any carpenter, I'm sure you guys could take care of. We use what's called a fine multi-master tool. Are you familiar with that? F-E-I-N. And it's a nice tool for getting in and just we cut sills out with it. And there's different ways to get the sill out. Without pulling the jamb, you're not going to be able to put it back on like it was before, but you can retrofit a sill in there. If it's a spot, and we'll talk about patching here, if it's a spot in the corner, which I see a lot, sometimes I actually don't see that often where the whole sill is beyond patching or repairing, but it does happen. But if there's a spot, then we will treat that. The sooner you treat that, the better, because water's getting into the wall. and it's just going to continue to get worse. So that's something I always look for is, do you have rotten sills and rotten sashes, or the jam leg? So we call the jam leg usually from like here up. So see a lot of times where maybe the sash is bad, the sill is bad, and then the jam here is. So you can cut it, replace that part. To do it right, you'd pull the jam out. You'd pull it all out, rebuild it. But I think the number one thing to do is get the address any gaps, holes where water's getting in. So, and then patching to those spots. And we talked about earlier, let's say, so I treat holes in the sill like that as a cavity. So I'll get in with a scraper and get all the loose stuff out, everything kind of sand it. Anything that's loose or just bad wood, it comes out. Then the product we normally use is called Boracare. I think it's on that resource link, is it? Or on that list? B-O-R-C-R-E. You can order it. You can usually buy it at pesticide places because it's used for killing the fungus that causes rot, or it makes insects not want to eat it. So termites and carpenter ants and that kind of stuff. So it's used for pest prevention. We use it for rot prevention. So if we make a sash or a sill, we spray it. So it's 50-50 mix. So we'll usually, you can brush it on or roll it on. We'll sometimes put it in a spray bottle, 50-50, shake it up really good and spray the area. It'll gum up your bottle after a while, but I want to soak it pretty good and let it dry for a day or so. And then we will we'll use wood epox, which is the Abatron stuff. Pack it down in there real good. And depending on how thick it is, it can take a few days to dry.